and you can see the shark circling around her and her popularity plummeting.
What do you, with a senior government minister, can go past without a question about Mr Donald Trump? What impact do you expect the Trump tariffs to have on our economy?
Well, we want to avoid tariffs, and we are working on an economic agreement at the moment. Well, wait a second. I've got a little bit more confidence in our negotiators, and we're working to get a deal with the United States. We're working quickly on that. When our Prime Minister, when Keir Starmer met Donald Trump a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump, the US President, said that he wanted to work on a deal, and that's what we are now doing. I believe in free and open trade. I want to reduce tariffs, not increase them.
You're expecting us to escape the fate of Mexico, Canada, most of the EU, and that we'll be the only people he won't slap tariffs on?
Well, let's see what happens. I don't want tariffs. British businesses don't want tariffs. It results in higher prices and less choice for people in the shops. So we are working to try and ensure that we can continue the free and open trade. There are 1 million British people working for American firms. There are 1 million Americans working for British firms. We have balanced trade with the US, no surplus, no deficit. We want to keep it that way.
The past. You routinely blame the Tories for the situation you're in, but business leaders routinely say that it was your pessimistic messages in the autumn that discouraged spending, your national insurance rise that halted hiring and depressed the economy. Honestly, looking back at it now, did you overdo the doom and gloom?
When I became Chancellor, we did inherit a £22 billion black hole in the public finances.
Much
I had to
take, but anyway.
Well, the OBR set out that in the numbers they published last year. We have addressed that. It did require difficult decisions, particularly in terms of tax.
But that's not what I'm asking you about. The message you were giving, and the Prime Minister, through the autumn was, it's terrible, it's awful, we have to do all sorts of things. Did you overdo the pessimism?
No, we took the action that was necessary to ensure that our public services and public finances were on a firm footing. And the tax, the national insurance, the non-dom tax, the VAT on private schools, that money has been used to both secure the public finances and to put more than £20 billion into the National Health Service, which is why for 5 months in a row now we've seen NHS waiting lists decline. It's why from April we're beginning to roll out breakfast clubs, free breakfast clubs at every primary school to help working parents and give children the best start in life.
Forgive me for interrupting you.
That's what we've been able to deliver.
List. But those national insurance rises haven't actually kicked in yet. They're about to kick in now. Is that going to depress the economy further?
Well, look, the Office of Budget Responsibility will set out their forecast. I recognise that there are costs. Well, because it's them who do the forecast.
Because you're the Chancellor, and you've mentioned the OBR, I think, now 5 times. Who's running this country? Is it you or the OBR?
I make the policy decisions, but it is right that forecasting is done by someone else. I shouldn't be marking my own homework, and I'm not going to be doing that. Unlike the previous government, I've got respect for those independent economic institutions. But, Trevor, your question is, do tax increases have an impact on the economy? Of course they do. But imagine if I'd have done something else last October. Imagine if I'd have swept the problems under the carpet and said everything was fine. Then today, when we face the aggression from Russia, we wouldn't have the additional money to spend on defence. We would be in a situation where NHS waiting lists will continue.
It's not additional money. You took it out of overseas aid. It's not additional money. You took it out of the international aid budget.
Yes, we made that decision, but if the public finances weren't on a firm footing, we'd have to be raiding budgets to prop up the public finances. Instead, we were able to redirect money from international development to defence spending. And
I heard a lot of sort of, it's not me, Gov, you know, we're doing our best. Look at the inflation figures, which always sounds very shallow just before a sort of mini fiscal event like this. I think she's really struggling. I think she's struggling for both important constituencies. As you said, we were going to talk about the party being very important, the Labour Party, but also the financial markets, who I'm not sure are buying what she's selling. So I think she certainly is in a much weaker position than she was a few months ago. And you can see the shark circling around her and her popularity plummeting.
That was upbeat Rachel today. She was quite robust. What do you think she has to do on Wednesday with this spring statement?
Well, it was never meant to be a particularly big event, the spring statement. The idea is you have the budget in the autumn, and this was just to almost say, well, here are how things look. And unfortunately for the Chancellor, because the economy has deteriorated, because she left herself some headroom, but not enough headroom, we're now expecting to see that event have two pieces of bad news. One being that the growth forecast is going to be slashed. And secondly, that her headroom may no longer exist. So therefore, she needs to find some more headroom, which is where you get into these cuts on civil service, some of the welfare reform. So I think she needs to show that she has, show to the markets that she has a plan, but also through that plan of cutting things, keeping her party on side about enough to get through it.
I want to come to the party, but Daisy, did you hear a plan there?
I heard a lot of sort of, it's not me, Gov, we're doing our best. Look at the inflation figures, which always sounds very shallow just before, a sort of mini fiscal event like this. I think she's really struggling. I think she's struggling for both important constituencies. As you said, we were going to talk about the party being very important, the Labour Party, but also the financial markets, who I'm not sure are buying what she's selling. So I think she certainly is in a much weaker position than she was a few months ago. And you can see the sharks circling around her and her popularity plummeting.
What do you think, Sonia? Is she on her own here, or is it still number 10 and number 11 working together?
I think it's still number 10 and number 11. I think the issue is that when you look at where the criticism is coming from within the party when it comes to spending cuts, it's not just usual suspects. So it's usually loyal MPs, backbench MPs, who are particularly unhappy about disability cuts. You've got people like David Blunkett, hardly from the left of the party, saying, actually, this is a point where the Chancellor needs to stop thinking about cutting spending and thinking about rewriting the fiscal rules as they are in Germany. You've got other people saying, well, let's look at tax rises instead. And I think that's the key thing here. The Chancellor wants to say, look, I've got no real choice apart from cutting spending. And it is inevitable that those spending cuts are going to hit the most vulnerable in society the worst, I think. That's what we're starting to see. But there are others in the party who say, but that's not the only option. You could relax your fiscal rules, or you could actually, for example, freeze tax thresholds for the next couple of years. Painful, but maybe it's better than some disabled people losing up to £10,000 a year. I'm
quite surprised, actually, that there's nothing, but we may hear something on tax thresholds. Let's talk about what we understand that she's going to do. 10,000 out of 500 civil servants. Daisy, does this amount to rewiring the state, as the phrase that we keep hearing?
No, and it's always such an easy lever for politicians to pull, because civil servants losing their jobs never gets any public sympathy. It's not, as she was very keen to say, she'd rather see nurses have these jobs rather than civil servants, but it's easy. And when you actually get down to it, it's not that easy. It's easy to sell, but it's very difficult to actually do. And it's that sort of headline-grabbing number that you know that you're going to get picked up on, but actually in the future, when we look back, I absolutely guarantee it won't end up happening. Well,
you say it's headline grab. It took 6 goes for me to get a 10,000 figure out. I'm not quite sure why she just didn't say it's 10,000, because actually it strikes me as a classic piece of Starmerism, which is big problem, massive catastrophe, massive difficulty. Here's a tiny 10,000 is what, 1 point a bit percent?
Yeah, the savings.
1.7%.
Yeah, the savings are, and it's the same when you look at the NHS, for example. So they've announced that they're abolishing NHS England and bringing Department of Health and NHS England together. You know, that might be 10,000 jobs as well. In the scale of the NHS budget, it is really incremental, which makes you start to feel like some of this may just be a bit more presentational. The other thing is, of course, is that there's not a lot of public sympathy for civil servants losing jobs. That's true, but if that's 10,000 from the civil service in general, some people think it could be another 20,000 job cuts from NHS England and regional integrated care boards. These are actually starting to be a fair number of jobs as well. People with mortgages to pay, kids in school, and that's a lot of people to be losing jobs.
I think on the one hand, you obviously have figures in number 10 who really want to talk up the idea that this is now an insurgent government and they are, tearing things down from the inside. You have these, they will compare themselves sometimes to Dominic Cummings, for example, with that diagnosis of the state is not working. And that's because they think if you're taking on the Reform Party and others, you can't look like you're part of the problem. You have to look as though you're changing things from the inside. But then, as you say, you look at some of these numbers and this radical solution is actually fairly small fry in places. I mean, even the benefits changes, the welfare reforms, obviously, as Sonia said, there's lots of Labour MPs who think they're cruel and unhappy, but if you look at the numbers of savings compared to the ballooning welfare bill, it's still fairly minimal in terms of what you're going to be left with on cost for the taxpayer.
I think it's interesting that you're mentioning reform. A lot of people saying that Rachel Reeves has got until the autumn, and it'll depend on how well reform does between now as whether she'll keep her job.
OK, well, we'll no doubt talk a bit more about the politics of this, but clearly it's nothing like what's happening where you're going, where there's a bloke with a chainsaw taking the axe or taking a chainsaw to civil service. It is now.
The problem is, when our viewers, some of them, look at what you've done, they don't think that you are sticking to the promises you made. David got in touch to say, when people voted Labour to remove the Tories, they did not expect a continuation of Tory policies. Again, you're choosing to cut welfare. You've already taken winter fuel payments from most pensioners. What do you say to David? He's looked at what you're doing and is saying, that's not a Labour government I voted for.
At the moment, we've got 1,000 people a day going on to personal independence payments. For the people who need support, we will continue to protect them, and that's the guarantee that I will make.
Some of things that you are doing, and we've got viewers who've been getting in touch with us this week. Another one, Janice. She's quoted what the Prime Minister said to us, saying, as he said, the broadest shoulders should bear the heaviest burden. Is this really pensioners, the sick and the disabled? What do you say to her?
Well, at the budget last year, we froze fuel duty and we didn't increase the taxes that working people pay, their national insurance, income tax or VAT. But we did increase taxes on the wealthiest. We've got rid of the non-dom tax status, VAT on private schools. We increased capital gains tax, and we tightened up the rules around inheritance tax. At the same time, we increased taxes on business.
But why
what did we use that money for?
The impression, because politics is about often what people feel the government's doing in their name. And for these people who've been getting in touch with us this week, and perhaps many people watching at home, you've given them the sense that you're not the Labour Party who made promises to them in the election. You've been doing things like cutting the winter fuel payment, cutting welfare. This week we expect you to cut the budgets of some government departments. Have you not got the story right? Or are they right to think that actually you've changed your mind on lots of things?
Well, we inherited a huge black hole, £22 billion black hole in the public finances when I became Chancellor. That required a number of difficult decisions on tax, on welfare and on spending.